The more I look, the more I realize it's foundational. Deuterium is foundational in our health problem. What about the cardiovascular plaque? I think it traps deuterium. Cancer is not necessarily bad. I believe that inflammation is a technique to provide deuterium-depleted water. It's a backup system when the regular system's broken. There's 155 parts per million of deuterium in natural water. Deuterium stays behind in the ice when the water melts. So drinking glacier water is a healthy thing to do.
And how expensive is it? Do you think the price will come down?
You can make it synthetically 1,000 times cheaper than natural. Butter is a low deuterium nutrient. In fact, organic butter has lower deuterium than non-organic butter.
Do you feel like the carnivore diet is a good approach if someone wants to reduce their deuterium load and intake?
Our atoms in our body are hydrogen, and it's involved in all the chemical reactions. You don't do a reaction without hydrogen.
What if something tiny, one of the smallest things in your body and in your water supply, was quietly controlling your energy, your metabolism, maybe how you're aging, and even your risk for disease, something you've probably never heard about? That's what we're going to talk about today with Dr. Stephanie Seneff. She's at MIT, senior research scientist. We're going to talk about deuterium, something I've been hearing a lot about, something I know a lot of you are very curious about. And so I brought her on the show specifically to do a deep dive into deuterium and ATP production, mitochondrial health, and glyphosate, of course. So thank you for coming, Dr. Seneff. I'm really excited to talk to you.
Great to be here again. Thank you.
Yeah. So for anyone listening today, just because I like to start really practical, how might deuterium and maybe its overabundance in the body or in the food supply be affecting their everyday life?
Okay, through mitochondria. It's a simple.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, and what are mitochondria? Those are the little organelles inside the cell that provide energy to the cell in the form of ATP. So they're super important to the cell. They're kind of cool because they come from ancient bacterial organisms that got merged together. Two different kinds of very tiny species merged together to make a cell with mitochondria, and that became a eukaryotic cell. Kind of interesting history there.
Yeah. And so what would we be experiencing that as, like fatigue?
Yes, for sure, fatigue. And also you'd probably get inflammation, lots of aches and pains, and probably brain fog. I mean, a lot of things. It also leads directly to cancer and all kinds of metabolic diseases. I mean, it's an absolute mess, because you'll find if you search the research literature, you will eventually notice that almost all of these chronic diseases that we're suffering from today can be associated with mitochondrial dysfunction. It's like all over the place, mitochondrial dysfunction and gut dysbiosis. I would say those are two key words that tie all these diseases together, all the diseases that are going up dramatically exactly in step with glyphosate usage.
Yes, and we'll get to glyphosate in a minute, but take us, what is deuterium? I mean, people are serving deuterium depleted water, and I see it all over YouTube. So give us a high level. What is it? Where's it found? And how did this get on your radar?
Great questions. So what it is heavy hydrogen. Hydrogen is the most common atom in the universe, and by far the most common atom in our body. I don't know the exact numbers, but it's more than 60% of the, it's so tiny, if you count it by size versus mass, it might even be like 90%. I don't know, but it's a lot of our atoms in our body are hydrogen, and it's involved in all the chemical reactions. You don't do a reaction without hydrogen. So very, very important.
It's in our carbohydrates, our fats, they are.
Yes, it's in all of our nutrients, absolutely. And of course, water is H2O, 2 hydrogens and 1 oxygen. So there you are. Water is essential for life, right? Deuterium is a heavy hydrogen. It's like carbon-14. If you know carbon-12, carbon-14 tracing, it's 14 instead of 12, so it's a little bit heavier than carbon. It's just this number that has to do with how many neutrons and protons there are in the nucleus. And hydrogen has only 1 proton and 1 electron. It's the tiniest atom over there on the upper left corner of the periodic chart. And deuterium is an isotope of hydrogen. So it has 1 proton, 1 electron, and 1 neutron, which makes it twice as heavy as hydrogen. It's a big difference between hydrogen and deuterium, and therefore deuterium doesn't behave the same way hydrogen does in reactions, but it's all over the place. There's it's very small amounts compared to hydrogen, but it's big amounts compared to other things like the minerals. 5 or 6 times as much deuterium in the blood as calcium, for example.
And is this naturally occurring? How does hydrogen go from, deuterium or regular hydrogen? Like how does it make this transition?
It doesn't. I mean, pretty much I think hydrogen is hydrogen, deuterium is deuterium, and they've come from the sun, all these, maybe there were like nuclear reactions that's up there in very high energy situations up there in the, in the stratosphere. I mean, it's, they're there and they're pretty stable. It's not like tritium. It's not radioactive.
And so does it, in our body, how does the imbalance take place?
Yeah, well, what happens is that there's 155 parts per million of deuterium in water, in natural water. For example, seawater. Seawater is all the same. So the seawater has about 155 parts per million. And some other waters have less, especially glacier water can get down to like 100 or maybe even 90 glacier water because the deuterium stays behind in the ice when the water melts. So drinking glacier water is a healthy thing to do. Because they're getting low deuterium. And then they can make water that's really low in deuterium, which is what I use. I have this right here. I have a glass every day, just this size, 2/3 regular water and 1/3 extremely deuterium depleted water, which I buy. And it's expensive. And I've been doing this for a long time. So it shows you how much I believe in it, that I'm buying it because it's so expensive. It seems ridiculous to pay that kind of money for water.
That's what I was thinking. And like, how big of a lever is it? And how expensive is it? Do you think the price will come down?
I'm hoping the price will come down. It's made in Russia. I think we import it from Russia, which is part of the cost, right? If someone would be adventuresome to set up a factory to make it here in the United States or, where you are, it would reduce the price a lot, I think. So, and especially, of course, volume. If there's lots of people who want to buy it, the price will go down. I'm hopeful that the price could go down. And of course, you don't have to drink deuterium depleted water to get deuterium depletion. A more important way is to make sure your microbes are healthy because the microbes do a huge amount of work to keep deuterium out of the mitochondria in the gut.
Okay, so tell us more about that. Just eating fermented foods and fiber. What are the steps you think that would help our body do that?
Those two would definitely help. Fermented foods and fiber. And also, interestingly, animal-based foods that have, choline. There's like
liver and eggs, like liver and eggs.
Oh yes, liver and eggs are loaded with these molecules that have trimethyls on them, 3 methyl groups, and those methyl groups all have low deuterium if they're natural. And so I'm trying to think carnitine and choline, and also even glycine. These are all sources, if they're natural, they're sources of low deuterium nutrients. And lactate is too. Lactate is produced by the microbes during fermentation. So when you take fermented foods, you're taking lactate, and lactate is a low deuterium nutrient. Butter is a low deuterium nutrient. And butyrate is a low deuterium nutrient. There's a lot of butyrate in butter. So there's a lot of foods you can eat that are low, and of course fats. All the fats are low in deuterium.
I love that. Why is that?
Well, the way they make the fats has to do with reactions that keep deuterium out. So there's these cool enzymes that do something called proton tunneling. It's really neat biophysics. And they've learned how to, like if there's a molecule sitting there and they want to take a proton off of it, but whoops, that's a deuteron. They say, no, I'm not going to throw it away. I don't want it. They only take it with a proton because the deuterons can't tunnel very well. They don't get picked up by the enzyme. So the product becomes depleted because the enzyme won't react with something that has a deuterium atom there. That's a super important principle for keeping the mitochondria happy because they're getting low deuterium nutrients. And the microbes do that wonderfully.
That is so interesting. And you said glycine and carnitine and choline naturally. Do you mean not supplementally?
Right. The worrisome thing to me is supplements because the supplements are done synthetically in the chemistry lab. So there's no biology there.
Right.
So they're not going to have that feature that the natural forms have. And that's very worrisome.
Yeah.
Because, and I've done a whole paper on melatonin, which is really fascinating because melatonin has a methyl group, and the methyl group can be traced back to those bacteria who made it low in deuterium. And then so the melatonin is low in deuterium, and it has that methyl group that's very special because it actually delivers it to the mitochondria. Melatonin gives the mitochondria low deuterium nutrient.
That's interesting. Okay, so this I didn't even plan to talk about, but that's what I love about talking to you. You have such a diverse foundation of knowledge. So we do we have in our sleep protein powder a phytomelatonin, which is primarily like phytonutrients with melatonin derived from a tomato. So do you think...
Oh, yeah, that's great.
Yeah, so do you think that would have... So are you saying synthetically derived melatonin is also... Yeah, so you're saying that would probably have a better low deuterium status than would synthetically derived melatonin. Or do you think?
Absolutely. And in fact, it worries me because, and actually there's a whole paper we found, we have this melatonin paper that got accepted. It's not available yet. It just recently got accepted. So we're excited. It'll show up eventually on the web. And we found a paper that we referenced there that was talking about producing melatonin for sale, and it was discussing the problems because you can make it synthetically 1,000 times cheaper than natural, and you can get it naturally from various foods, but you get it in small amounts, so you need to know which foods, and I actually need to find out. I've been wanting to make that list. You may know which foods have melatonin in them because you can eat it, which is fantastic, or you can make a supplement that's 1,000 times more expensive. Or you can do GMO technology to get a bug to make it by putting a human gene into its genome. And of course, the people who want natural don't want GMO. So they were talking about that in the paper, that there was a problem because you couldn't really come up with a pathway that would be, reasonable. But really, anything that's a natural source of melatonin is a fantastic thing to take, to eat a lot of. But more than that, if you can keep your gut microbes happy, they can make the methyls can make the melatonin, your body can make it, it's fine. So you need to always think in terms of how to eat the foods that are going to optimize your gut microbiome and how to keep your gut microbiome healthy so that it can help you make the things that you need that are deuterium depleted.
Oh, you are speaking my language. And one other thing, so if it looks to me, you're saying kind of a higher fat diet. I've heard you say in other interviews that processed foods, high carbohydrate diets, those would have higher levels of deuterium.
That's right.
That's right.
There's a general trend, fats less than proteins, less than carbs. So if you eat a high fat diet, you're eating a low deuterium diet. And if you eat a high carb diet, you're eating a high deuterium diet.
So lower carbs, higher fats, and then also microbiome supportive. So we're getting those fermented foods. We're getting lots of low starchy stuff, not highly processed refined carbohydrates. And then deuterium depleted water if we want. But then the other thing I've heard you talk about that I love is that animal products fed grain might contain more deuterium as well. So we could be mindful of that too. Is that another lever?
That appears to be true. And in fact, organic butter has lower deuterium than non-organic butter.
Interesting.
Because the animals are being affected by the toxic exposures, just as we are.
So it's like affecting their mitochondria, which is affecting the composition of their fatty acids.
Yeah, they can't make the butter as low in deuterium because they've got a deuterium problem, just like we do.
Okay, well, thank you. I love that we started with the practical, but now tell us, Dr. Seneff, you are a master of finding patterns and like these kind of root cause issues with widespread ramifications. So tell us, how did deuterium get on your radar initially?
Yeah, that's actually fun because I feel like I've had an epiphany a few times in my life, where I just suddenly realized something and went after it and just kind of dropped whatever else I was doing. And one time was when I heard a lecture on glyphosate in 2012, Professor Don Huber, 2-hour presentation. And I was really keen on autism. I'd read all kinds of stuff about autism and I was like really confused because I couldn't find anything. I said, there's got to be something in the environment that's causing this. And I came up short. Yeah, after that presentation, I walked away convinced I had found my answer. And I dove right in and haven't looked back. And I published my book, Toxic Legacy, which I have here.
Yes.
In 2000. Yeah. And that was in 2020. I forget now.
I think it was before 2020, was it?
19, was it?
Maybe.
I can look it up. But anyway, yeah, a few years back, I published my book, and that's on glyphosate, and I have lots and lots of references in there. And I became convinced right away after that presentation by Don Huber that glyphosate was my answer as far as the primary cause, not the only thing that causes autism, but the primary cause of the epidemic. So then I was studying glyphosate all these years, and then it was in 2019 that I got a message from Professor Laszlo Boros, and he's one of the world's experts on deuterium, possibly the biggest expert on deuterium in the West. I'm not sure, but I would put him right up there at the top. And he just sent a blind email to me congratulating me on a paper that I had written together with Greg Nye. And then he sort of said, oh, by the way, do you know about deuterium? And of course I didn't. I mean, I knew what it was, but I didn't have any clue that it caused anything in biology. I was completely clueless, And so we did a Zoom call, and it became very clear to me very quickly that the enzymes that glyphosate disrupts are the same enzymes that manage deuterium for the host in the microbes. So I already knew those enzymes were being affected by glyphosate, and then I saw those enzymes were critical for maintaining low deuterium in the mitochondria. So you can easily put 2 and 2 together to get 5 with that one,
Right.
So
Interesting.
then I dove into deuterium for the next few years. I'm still diving into deuterium, and it has been a real watershed experience for me because the more I look, the more I realize that it's foundational. Deuterium is foundational in our health problem for
Tell us.
everything.
Give us the mechanisms. What have you discovered, Dr. Flynn? Yeah, and take us through, like, describe ATP, mitochondria. Just give us a little biology lesson like you do so well.
Okay. Yeah. So I said already the mitochondria make the ATP for the host, for their cell, and they provide most of the energy. Glycolysis provides some, but then that's an anaerobic process outside the mitochondria. The mitochondria make the ATP using an enzyme called ATPase, and that enzyme is very, very sensitive to glyphosate. And so it uses proton tunneling. It sort of basically, it takes advantage of these protons that are trying to get through the membrane, the intermembrane space into the matrix. The matrix is inside the mitochondria like a donut hole, and the matrix is where a lot of the enzymes are that are doing various things, like, for example, the citric acid cycle, which is that's turning glucose into carbon dioxide and water. That happens inside the mitochondria. And at the same time, it produces the ATP out of the energy that it gets by basically burning glucose or many other small metabolites. For everything. I get a little distracted here and there. But anyway, we got this matrix, we got this intermembrane, and then there's this intermembrane space. There's a membrane around the mitochondria, and the membrane has inside it a lot of activity. And what happens is that the matrix pumps protons into the intermembrane space to create a proton gradient. So there's too many protons in the walls and too few in the matrix. The matrix is depleted in protons. And so when you allow the protons to come through, they have all those ATPase pumps sitting there waiting to grab the protons as they come through. And the protons turn the motor it's a little nanomotor. And the proton force is what turns the motor, and turning the motor gives you the energy that converts ADP to ATP. So it's pretty cool physics, really, biophysics. But the protons, if a deuteron comes in, it's twice as big. It's like, putting a football there instead of a baseball. So it's sort of everything. It gums up the pumps. It breaks them. Deuterium breaks them. So the matrix tries very hard not to push deuterons into that membrane, into that intermembrane space.
Yeah, and tell us about, like, the state of the research. So when that baseball or like a football goes in instead of the baseball, what do we end up with? What has research shown this can cause?
Well, what happens is the pump breaks. And so you have all these pumps, and they break when they get too much deuterium. And when they break, they spew out reactive oxygen, which is damaging to the cell, and they are less efficient to make the ATP. They waste energy making basically reactive oxygen species instead of making ATP.
Would it also...
So that's super bad for the mitochondria.
Yeah. Would that create inflammation too, in addition to, like, lower energy?
Inflammation is very interesting, and I do think so. I actually am working on a paper. I've published a paper that talks about this, that I believe that inflammation is a technique to provide deuterium-depleted water to the mitochondria instead of the normal way that you would do it. It's a backup system when the regular system's broken. For everything, the regular system is based on hydrogen gas, which the microbes make, super low in deuterium. So I found this wonderful paper from the 1960s that showed that a microbial hydrogenase enzyme is called hydrogenase, which takes hydrogen out of organic molecules and makes hydrogen gas, H2. And that's a gas, right? So it makes hydrogen gas. You get bloating in your gut if you get too much hydrogen. And hydrogen gas has actually become a very popular therapy among alternative medicine specialists.
For what exactly?
For everything. I mean, people are really shouting. And Mercola just wrote a long article. I noticed. I just grabbed it today on the wonders of hydrogen gas. And there's several papers out. They don't really understand why, but they see that it's beneficial for all kinds of diseases. It doesn't surprise me at all because it is the source of deuterium-depleted nutrients, the primary source, I would say, that the mitochondria make. So these bugs that they wrote about in this 1960s paper, they weren't bugs that hang out in the human gut, but they had a hydrogenase enzyme. They were marine bugs, I think, marine microbes. But they showed that they produced hydrogen gas that had lost 80% of its deuterium. So by a wonderful way to make deuterium-depleted protons, if you will, by making hydrogen gas. And I think that's not surprising because deuterium's twice as heavy. If you think about something getting out of the water, hydrogen evaporating from the water, if it's twice as heavy, it's not going to want to leave as nearly as well because it's just too heavy, right?
Yeah.
So the deuterium tends to stay behind in solution when you make the gas. So the gas ends up with a lot less deuterium. And the gut microbes use that trick in a big way to make hydrogen gas. And then they use that hydrogen gas as a reducing agent and they make a bunch of things from it, one of which is methane gas. So you have problems with methane and hydrogen, you get bloating.
Yeah.
That's because the microbes that take those gases and turn them back into organic matter are broken, and they're broken by glyphosate. So when people have bloating, it's an indicator that the enzymes that the microbes use to make those deuterium-depleted nutrients are broken.
And that's a glyphosate issue. So we have the gut dysfunction with glyphosate, and then the deuterium with the mitochondrial dysfunction, and the two of them in tandem. Or does that?
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So, and I've seen some animal evidence that maybe deuterium depleted water can improve behavioral outcomes, maybe memory. Can you take us through like what the literature, what does the animal trials show, and what about the human trials? Take us through that.
I mean, the trials are amazing, and I've found these papers that have these charts, and they say, hydrogen supplementation, helps all these things, and it's like a huge list. It's like all the diseases practically.
Yeah.
They really hype it up, but they've only observed it experimentally, and they don't really understand why. But I know why, and so I think hydrogen gas, no matter how you make it, is going to be depleted. Maybe not as much as because microbes usually have fancy enzymes that can do neat stuff. But even hydrogen gas that's just made from these pills that you drop into water and it bubbles, and then you drink. It'll disappear if you don't drink it quickly. So you have to kind of gulp it down, But that's also probably deuterium depleted, and the microbes know how to use it to turn it into deuterium depleted nutrients. So that it's probably, I think it's therapeutic because of that. It's low in deuterium, and the microbes know how to use it.
Interesting. And what about deuterium and cancer? I've seen that.
Oh my, I have a huge story, and I'm building it. I'm super into that right now. I've been actually making breakthroughs in my understanding of deuterium and cancer very recently, even as recently as yesterday. Figuring things out. Yeah, I'm super excited about it. We're working on a paper, really, really hard paper. Anthony Kyriakopoulos and I. He's been a really great teammate, and he's very brilliant. He writes things that are so intellectual that even I can't understand them sometimes, So he's a challenge, but he's wonderful. And he and I have been collaborating, trying to figure this thing out and getting somewhere, and especially, as I said, the last few days. So, and of course, we have a very different view of cancer than the mainstream. I think chemotherapy is a very bad idea categorically to treat cancer.
Tell us why.
So, and they know this. When they feed the cancer chemotherapy, the chemotherapy increases their rate of mutation in the cancer. Basically, it's just a sort of an evolutionary process that cancer cells, when they see chemotherapy, they make more mutations in their mitochondria. The mitochondrial DNA is very sensitive to the chemotherapy, which causes it to mutate. And so various enzymes, and certain enzymes are especially designed to mutate easily when they get stressed, which there's something called P53 and P62. And these guys are interesting because I think P62 is supposed to be protective against cancer, but when it mutates, it can turn into a rogue version of itself that actually causes cancer cells, encourages them to proliferate. So what's happening is that the cell is getting chemotherapy, which is causing mutations, which is causing new versions of these proteins to show up that behave very differently from the original version, from the healthy version. And those versions, some of them end up promoting proliferation. So what happens is that when you have that tumor and one of its cells gets this mutation and it starts multiplying more, then you get more of that cell, and it starts to dominate the cancer. So this is how the cancer ends up with these rogue versions of these proteins that are supposed to be protective against cancer that actually turn into proteins that can help the cancer grow.
It's kind of
what happens in response to the chemotherapy.
Yeah, sorry, is it kind of like antibiotics lead to like superbugs and antibiotic resistant bacteria?
Like that, yes.
Okay.
I was thinking of Darwinian evolution. It's kind of a Darwinian evolutionary process. That was the word I was struggling with.
Well, you got it. There you go. So chemo is obviously potentially leading to these mutations that are dangerous, and you see cancer more of as a metabolic condition. Yes. Can you tell us what are these, if you want to share, if you feel like you can share, what are you finding in this paper about the link between deuterium and cancer?
It's amazing, actually. And we have published actually several papers linking deuterium to cancer, and also several papers proposing that cancer is not necessarily bad. In other words, cancer is actually, it comes about as a consequence of severe mitochondrial damage systemically. So the whole organism is on the brink of disaster, which that's what forces cancer to appear someplace in the body. It's all kind of random where it shows up. And the cancer wants to grow because it has a job to do. And the job it wants to do is to fuel the rest of the body with deuterium-depleted nutrients. And so cancer cells change their metabolism in a huge way. They make tons of lactate. you may know this. This is this weird metabolic change that happens in cancer cells where they convert glucose. They use a tremendous amount of glycolysis to convert. It's called the Warburg effect, and they convert glucose into lactate, and they ship the lactate out. And so the immune cells actually swarm into the tumor tissue. They come in there, and we think they're trying to fight the cancer, but they're not. They're actually trying to partake of the riches that the cancer is providing, I think.
The lactate.
The lactate, yeah. And there's other things too, but the lactate is fantastic. So they can take that. It's a low-deuterium nutrient, as I mentioned before. The microbes make it through fermentation, and you take lactate when you eat fermented foods. It's a low-deuterium nutrient, which the tumor is providing the immune cells that are hanging out around the tumor cells with a very valuable low-deuterium nutrient that can help the immune cells fix their mitochondria, which is
interesting.
And if they fix their mitochondria, they can then attack the tumors. They have to sit there waiting until the tumor gives them enough nutrients to fix them. And once they're fixed, then they can remove the tumor. The tumor has it wants to get in and get out. It grows bigger, it makes lots of lactate, and the immune cells get healthy, and then they can clear it out. If the tumor is actually happy to die, once the outside deuterium levels are low enough, it inspires the tumor to die. And that's why deuterium-depleted water treats cancer, because it provides the tumor with low-deuterium water outside the cells, which is a signal to the cancer to say, oh, good, you're done. You can close shop, and which cancer dies. So it's the opposite of what they do with their chemo is the exact opposite of what you should be doing. They're encouraging the cancer to grow by virtue of all these mutations that are caused by the chemo.
Yeah, whereas lactate provides that off switch. So would you say then cancer, because sugar can create, these metabolic derangements. Would you say a low sugar, high lactate diet and with deuterium depleted water or other, low deuterium nutrients would be a great preventative cancer strategy?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And there are other things that taurine is a really good answer, which is, and of course, melatonin, anything that can provide you with deuterium depleted nutrients is going to be good to help solve the cancer problem. Because I believe the cancer is there because of the deuterium problem. And the cancer's job is to fix the deuterium problem. It has a mission, and it will fight like hell to keep going. The chemo, shrinks the tumor, which it does kill off a lot of the cancer cells. It's so toxic, it kills them off. But the ones that are left behind, they get this rogue version of themselves that can start multiplying like crazy. They take over the space and it grows back, But they also even metastasize. The chemo encourages the cancer to become metastatic, and that's going to just spread once it lets those cells loose and they go someplace else, and now you've got a new cancer, elsewhere in your body. That's when you're in really big trouble. That's what usually kills you with cancer is the metastasis, which is caused by the chemotherapy.
And I have someone I love very much in a late stage metastasized cancer. So would you have any suggestions for people in that stage?
It's the same thing. Eat as healthy food as you can
and
find.
And depleted water.
Yeah, all that stuff. Eating the probiotics and the high fat diet, and eating lots of eggs, and anything, seafood, anything that's nutrient dense, lots of nutrient dense foods, everything organic, do the best you can. And then of course drink deuterium depleted water, and then get out in the sunlight too, because the sunlight is also very healing.
I love that. And you talk about taurine. Animal products are great sources of taurine. Like you said, melatonin. You can do like pistachios, tomatoes, nuts are a great source of naturally occurring melatonin. Tart cherry has some phytomelatonin. So those are some.
I eat all of those. So I naturally have a.
Good job. Good for you. And then just like you said, nurturing that microbiome too. And Stephanie, you also talked about in another interview is this link between Alzheimer's and cancer. And I recently saw a paper you published about deuterium and neurodegeneration. So can you kind of talk about those, deuterium in the brain?
I'm so glad we got that paper published on Parkinson's disease, because that was really quite revolutionary, even for me.
Yeah.
I was like, whoa, I can't believe I'm really glad they published it. And of course, I do believe in it, but it was really, really interesting, because I do think, again, that Alzheimer's, any of those brain problems, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, ALS, all those things, the brain requires a huge amount of deuterium depleted water to nourish its mitochondria, because it's got tons of mitochondria. Neurons are they're the most energetic cells. And they have tons of mitochondria, more so than any. It's sort of muscles and brain, neurons that have the most mitochondria. So they're very sensitive to excess deuterium in the mitochondria, which will just basically they'll die, because they can't just start proliferating like cancer can. They can't do it. they're all tied in. They're hooked up to all these other neurons. They can't proliferate. So their only choice is to die when they get damaged, too much damage to their mitochondria. And once the neurons die off, then you can't think. You get all kinds of, or you can't move. All these different problems that you get with neurons dying are a consequence of this deuterium toxicity in the mitochondria of the neurons. But what's really cool, so let's see if I can get this right. Cardiolipin. We talked a lot about cardiolipin in that article on Parkinson's disease.
Tell us what it is exactly.
Yeah, so it's one of those lipids. You have all these phospholipids, and they're quite complicated. Arachidonic acid is one that Mercola talks a lot about. Arachidonic acid, it's omega-6 fats. Those are phospholipids, and they're very important in the brain. The brain has lots and lots of fat, and it's very important to the brain function. Is that cardiolipin hangs out in the mitochondria, in the inner membrane of the mitochondria, and it actually. What we argued in that paper is that cardiolipin traps deuterium. When deuterium atoms get into the intramembrane space by mistake, basically, and they come shooting through the HEPase pumps, there's cardiolipin integrally entwined with the HEPase pumps. And it has these very special carbon atoms that are called bisallylic carbon. They're really cool. And those are in arachidonic acid as well. All these sort of polyunsaturated fatty acids contain these bisallylic carbon atoms that are really good at, so they're really interesting because if they trap a deuterium atom, they won't let go. Whereas most of the time, deuterium comes and goes. Like a nitrogen atom will pick up a deuterium and then it'll say, okay, take it off, put a hydrogen there, back and forth, back and forth. You can't control to keep the deuterium stuck to the nitrogen atom. But these, and carbon atoms mostly won't trade at all. They got a hydrogen, they're going to hang on to it for dear life and they're never going to let go. But these bisallylic carbon atoms are special and they're in these polyunsaturated fatty acids, and they start out low in deuterium because of the way they're made. The enzymes that make them try not to put a deuterium there. So they start out low, but then as they hang out in the median, if they see a deuterium atom coming by, they can grab it. And if they grab it, they won't let go, which is really, really cool. So I think the cardiolipin is actually trapping deuterium atoms that are coming through the HEPase pumps, trying to get them out of the way so the pump won't be affected. And when they accumulate enough deuterium, they move to the outer membrane of the mitochondria. And in the outer membrane, they link up with alpha-synuclein, which is a misfolded protein that is linked to Parkinson's disease. Mm-hmm. And so actually the alpha-synuclein and the cardiolipin that's now outside, available in the cytoplasm, they link up, they come together, they form plaque. Mm-hmm. And they form these Lewy bodies, which accumulate in the brain of the Parkinson's patient. And those Lewy bodies are trapping deuterium. This is sequestering deuterium and keeping it out of the way. That's what we talked about in our paper.
Would this apply to amyloid beta as well?
I think it does. And we haven't written about that, and I haven't studied as carefully as I need to in order to write about it. Yeah. But I think all of it. So not only do I think the plaque that's in the brain that's linked to all these, ALS, all these diseases have these various kinds of plaque. And all of that plaque, I think, traps deuterium. I'm guessing, this is very speculative.
Well, yeah.
Then I go one step further. Well, what about the cardiovascular plaque? I think it traps deuterium. And that's another paper that I'm working on right now. It's in rough form. And so I'm hoping to get that together and try to get it published at some point. But that's really cool to me. It really makes a lot of sense. Cholesterol is actually very interesting because it comes from 3 acetate molecules when you trace it back to its origins. And acetate is produced by the gut microbes and it's low in deuterium. So that means cholesterol is low in deuterium, right? It does, and cholesterol combines with the fats to make these cholesterol. It shows up inside the LDL particles. It does, and that's the stuff that gets inside the wall of the vessel, the blood vessel, to make the atherosclerosis.
Yeah.
And then, so those lipids that are trapped with the cholesterol, they have this bisallylic carbon. They're the same thing as the cardiolipin. They're not cardiolipin, but they're another form with arachidonic acid, so they have these same bisallylic carbon atoms that can trap deuterium. And in fact, studies have shown, this is quite wild, they have been able to feed people bisallylic carbon atoms in these fats, like arachidonic acid, where they've intentionally doped them up with deuterium. They've put deuterium in there already. And they find that when they have deuterium in there, it does have sort of, you can get this, it does, oxygenase produces a reactive oxygen, and it causes a lot of problems with inflammation. This all goes on, even in the artery wall, all this stuff is going on with inflammation. There's a whole sort of cascade reaction that takes place when these polyunsaturated fatty acids are exposed to reactive oxygen. They cause this cascade reaction that causes inflammation. And so when you dope them with deuterium, it actually shuts down the cascade reaction.
Interesting.
It shuts it down. So that's really interesting because I think what happens with the plaque is the plaque, gets in there, it gathers deuterium. It's trapping deuterium one by one. And eventually it traps enough deuterium that it calms down. And now it's not reactive anymore. It's just sitting there holding on to that deuterium.
That's fascinating. Okay. So just to kind of, because you're talking about these polyunsaturated fats, and I'm getting the impression that like a ketogenic diet is maybe a low deuterium diet, especially maybe when you emphasize polyunsaturates. Now, would you say there's different impacts for the omega-3s and the omega-6s? Or would you say...
There's a lot of discussion around that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I know there's an obsession right now against omega-6, and I know that we are apparently eating a lot more omega-6 than we used to. Like our diet is biased towards omega-6 rather than omega-3.
Yes.
And Mercola makes a huge deal out of omega-6. He hates arachidonic acid. He thinks it's like, terrible.
Yes, I see. Because it's like creating those inflammatory mediators, or, these enzymes are creating more inflammation, potentially.
Yeah. Saturated fat is the best fat, in my opinion, because it isn't reactive. That's the whole thing, is that the polyunsaturated, whether 6 or 3, they're going to be reactive and they're going to cause inflammation. But the thing is that inflammation is doing, just like the cancer, it's doing something for you that's positive.
Yeah.
And that's really interesting to me because that has to do with hydrogen peroxide. And that's another whole area that I'm looking at.
But those omega-3s also have, can create resolvins and pro-resolving mediators. So slightly different outcomes potentially. But interesting that polyunsaturated fats in your, in this deuterium hypothesis are beneficial, and a ketogenic diet would also be beneficial.
Right. So what I think is happening, and you think of the artery wall where you've got all that plaque building up, and then it's reacting with oxygen, which is being produced. So NADPH oxidase called NOx, NOx, you may have heard of that enzyme. It actually produces superoxide, which is really dangerous because it reacts with, superoxide can create this chain reaction that happens in these fats, And then in the process of the chain reaction, deuterium can get trapped. And when enough deuterium gets trapped, it calms down, right? And that's when you get these resolvins, actually, because it redirects. It's interesting. The enzymes that attack the fats produce different kinds of products. And the ones that produce resolvins are less reactive than the other ones. But when they get deuterium there, the other ones stop working because they won't deal. They're specialized enzymes that don't like to use. They won't react if there's a deuterium. So they leave behind the versions of the molecule that have got that deuterium trap, and then those are the versions that are able to go through the other reaction that produces the resolvins. And then the resolvins are going to shut down and say, "Okay, guys, we're done." Because it's an indicator that you've got a deuterium trap. So once you get enough deuterium trapped in the fats, the reaction calms down.
Fascinating. Oh my God.
Cool.
There's so many layers here. And so I want to get so are there other, like we've talked a lot about dietary factors. Are there other factors, lifestyle factors, exercise? Is there anything else you're doing on a daily basis? Give us your Dr. Seneff depleted lifestyle protocol. What are you doing every day for this?
Okay. Well, one thing is a glass of water with 1/3 deuterium every day.
Right? If there's nothing we can get here, we have to import it right now, right?
Yeah, it's expensive and you buy it from Russia, basically. But you can order it online, so it's easy to get, You can order it online, yeah. And then, of course, as you said, high-fat diet, high animal-based diet, and seafood is terrific. Seafood is so healthy because it has so many micronutrients. So you want to get lots of micronutrients. Make sure you get enough minerals, vitamins, and of course, and so I eat a salad almost every day. So, just fresh vegetables, tomatoes, and that sort of thing. My husband makes a wonderful salad dressing, oil and vinegar with a bunch of other herbs and whatnot in there, all organic, so we use that for our salad dressing. And then I eat, seafood. Like, we're having wild caught fish tonight, for example. So I always go for high-end, top-of-the-line foods, and of course I'm not poor. So that is helpful, because it can be expensive to maintain a healthy diet. But yeah. I go all out for everything certified organic, everything natural. I don't ever take a soy protein bar, and I hardly even eat a cookie. And if I do, it's organic, Is
there anything people can do that might not have the resources? Like any little steps they could take?
Yeah, there are ways to do these things more economic. Probably buying in bulk, maybe making your own bread, buying organic wheat, making your own bread, that kind of thing would probably be effective, I like gluten. I eat plenty of gluten-containing foods.
Really?
Yeah, I don't think gluten is bad. I think it's bad because of glyphosate. Glyphosate is in the wheat because it's sprayed right before harvest. That's causing the gluten intolerance problem.
I could see that. I could definitely see that because gluten is something we've eaten for a very long time. like you said, some people think it's a hybridization or like different types, but,
Right.
but yeah, glyphosate makes a lot of sense to me. And because the effects are in the gut primarily, right? You've done a lot of research on it.
And I even know how glyphosate would disrupt the gut in such a way as to cause gluten intolerance. I've written a paper about that. So glyphosate and gluten intolerance, yeah.
Yeah. Do you want to tell us, like, to give us a high level?
Well, lactobacillus, are really important in the gut for helping to digest wheat. The gluten contains lots of proline, and proline is a difficult amino acid to separate from the chain because it has stuff on its nitrogen atom that makes it harder for it to be pulled apart. Because there are enzymes that break up protein into individual amino acids, and then those can be recycled to make new proteins. That's a very important process of metabolism. In fact, they have all these jars of aminos, at the natural food store. People are buying aminos, which is like it's just a general pile of amino acids. I think it's a reflection of the fact that they're impaired in their ability to break down protein. So instead of eating proteins, you're eating digested proteins.
Right.
As a consequence of not being able to break down proteins. But the gluten is a tough protein to break down. Also casein. So both of those, people have a lot of problems with casein intolerance for dairy issues. So they give up dairy, they give up gluten, and that makes your diet very restricted when you do those two things. And so I think glyphosate is a major cause of all this sensitivity. Because it kills off those lactobacillus, they make some 6 different enzymes that specialize in breaking proline apart from the chain. So when those enzymes are not sufficient, these peptides stick around that are a few amino acids stuck together in a chain that is a reactive peptide that upsets the immune system and of course glyphosate creates a leaky gut. So these peptides get out into circulation. The immune cells get upset when they see them because it's a foreign peptide and they attack it. They develop antibodies that attack it. And then it turns out because through molecular mimicry, they start attacking your own proteins. And for example, proteins in the thyroid. So you can end up with thyroid problems as a consequence of these antibodies that were produced by the immune cells that saw these foreign proteins, foreign peptide sequences that weren't supposed to be there. And that's a direct, path to a gluten intolerance.
I love that. And an analogy I like is like if it's a pearl necklace, right? Gluten has just a lot of like little beads on that pearl necklace.
Yeah.
And when you don't have like the scissors anymore to chop them off, you end up with these really long pearl necklaces that your gut just sends into circulation or has trouble breaking down. So thank you for that. I had one of my favorite people was dying for me to ask you this question. So glyphosate, obviously huge topic right now, but I've also heard that there's these newer pesticides on the market that might have forever chemicals in them. Do you know anything about that? Or do you feel like there's...
Well, the forever chemicals are definitely a problem as well. And I'm very worried about if they really were forced for some reason to get rid of glyphosate. Did you hear my rooster?
I love that I heard your rooster. Awesome.
He pretty much is talking every day.
You're saying about the forever chemicals.
Yeah. So that for example, they no longer put glyphosate in the Roundup that they sell to the public in America. They've stopped doing that. Which sounds great, but what they've done is I think they've replaced it with 3 other chemicals that are all supposed to be worse than glyphosate. They're not fixing the problem. They might even be making it worse. Glyphosate is tricky because the government has said it's perfectly safe, which is a lie. But the problem is that it's subtle. It's a slow kill. And so you don't necessarily notice.
I just watched this interview with RFK, and there's legislation around, creating a domestic supply of glyphosate and the fact that farmers we couldn't grow food without glyphosate.
I know.
What do you think about that?
It just really drives me nuts. You can't live without it,
Yeah.
And that's crazy because we lived for how many millions of years without glyphosate? It's only been the last, 50 years that we've even depended on it. And the farmers have just become so crippled in a way that because they've gotten used to using glyphosate and they just think they can't live without it. But it's not true. And the thing is, what we need to do is to go back to certified organic farming and regenerative farming. We absolutely need to do that if we want to have a long-term future because we're wrecking our ability to reproduce. And I worry that we're going to get down to the point where we can't sustain our population because we don't have 2.0. We have less than 2.0 reproduction rate. We're gone. It's just a matter of time.
Yeah. And also, not only our reproduction rate, but then rates of autism and other...
I know.
It's like even when we are able to reproduce, 1 in 36, I've heard you say.
That gets so scary that I think if I were a young person today, I might really think hard about whether I really wanted to take take a risk, Do I really want to take a chance on having an autistic child? Or do I want to just remain, don't have kids? I mean, I think it starts to look like that, which is really sad that there's that kind of odds, And of course, all the other things too, the ADHD and the eczema, the asthma, all the problems that the kids have, the obesity.
Yeah, it's a really sad state. And I know even people who have developmental disorders can lead wonderful lives and bring a lot of joy. But it's when you look at the bigger picture, it's a very different society that we would be living within.
That we are living within right now compared to when I was a child, because kids were so much healthier then, and we get used to it. It's amazing how quickly we adapt to just understand, to think that it's normal for kids to have all these problems,
There are some questions about deuterium that our listeners had for you. So I want to close up because I want to be respectful of your time. The first thing is someone commented that deuterium is part of nature and has to be present in the environment. The same concentrations has been for millions of years. So you can't really change the amount on Earth. So is this really going to be impactful? What are your thoughts?
Well, no, you can't change the amount on Earth, but what you can change is the way it happened, the way it's dealt with in the body. And normally the body has systems that both keep deuterium out of the mitochondria and pack deuterium into the extracellular space, like in the bones, in the skin. Well, the microbiome, yeah, even the microbiome can trap deuterium. Like the bugs can live with very high deuterium, and I think they do so. So they produce deuterium depleted nutrients for the host, makes them have more deuterium, So they're also concentrating deuterium. The microbes, the skin, the bones, the joints, those are all places where you can pack deuterium in, and also all lining the blood vessels. I think the gelled water lining the blood vessels traps deuterium. And of course, all the plaque, right? The cholesterol, all the plaques and the Alzheimer's plaque, they're all trapping deuterium, and that's keeping it out of the mitochondria. And then you have these enzymes that know how to react so as to not put deuterium into the mitochondria. So the whole system of keeping and not just the mitochondria, but also other organelles inside the cell. I am low in deuterium.
Love it.
The lysosomes, ER, the endoplasmic reticulum, probably the nucleus, mitochondria, they're all low in deuterium compared to the cytoplasm. And then the cytoplasm is low in deuterium compared to the outside space. And then the plaque is even higher. So and in the bone is high in deuterium. So I am places that the body puts the deuterium and places that the body keeps the deuterium away. And when that whole system is broken, such as glyphosate, then everything falls apart. So it's not a matter of too much or too little. It's just in the wrong place.
Fantastic. Okay, this other one is carnivores eat lots of red meat, most coming from ruminant sources. I would expect the microbes in the stomachs would filter out a lot of the deuterium, lowering the anti-mitochondrial deuterium load for carnivores immensely. Do you feel like the carnivore diet is a good approach if someone wants to reduce their deuterium load and intake?
Absolutely think so. And in fact, especially, as I said, the methyl groups that are in the carnitine and the choline, each of those has 3 methyl groups. I come from methylation pathways where the microbes make sure the methyls are low in deuterium. So the entire methylation pathway, in my view, is a distribution system to get those low deuterium methyl groups to all the mitochondria throughout the body.
Fantastic. Okay. Then they're saying the plastic bottles are adding deuterium to the bottled drinking water. Is that true?
I mean, the plastic is a problem, actually, with the deuterium-depleted water, and I do buy it in plastic, which worries me because plastic is bad. So there's a trade-off there, and I don't know, how to balance that, whether I'm wasting my money because I'm getting poison from the plastic, because I don't generally drink bottled water,
Yeah. Okay, fair. Okay, and then the last question is, how can one deplete deuterium without buying light water and other brands of deuterium water? We use an AquaPure, and wondering if using drinking water that inhaling brown gas hydrogen helps deplete deuterium in the cell's mitochondria.
Yeah, so I think hydrogen gas is actually a good option. And you can get those pills that produce the hydrogen gas. Magnesium, I think it's a magnesium that then dissolves and makes hydrogen gas, and then you can drink that. And I think that's probably not a bad idea. You're getting magnesium as well. So I think that's probably a more cost-effective way in a sense.
Okay, and then the last thing that I wanted to ask you before you tell us where to connect with you is I've heard you talk on another interview about picky eating issues and what you think maybe the basis of that problem is, or if you have anything to say about that. I just see that all the time. My kid only eats 5 foods. Like, what do you think is behind that, and what can we do about it if you have any words of wisdom?
Well, that's interesting because I do remember, and it's too long ago, that I found a particular protein that has very strong evidence of glyphosate sensitivity. We didn't get into this, but glyphosate is a glycine molecule, except it has extra stuff on its nitrogen atom. It substitutes for glycine, I believe. I argue that it substitutes for glycine during protein synthesis. And there was a spectacular protein whose name escapes me at the moment. It's too long ago. I had a whole presentation where I talked about that particular protein, which, if it's defective, and it can be defective due to glycine mutations, it causes a picky eater problem. So I think that that particular protein could be one of the proteins that's affected in the autistic kids to cause them to be picky eaters.
Well, that's fascinating. Okay, and I said that was the last question, but my last question is, I know that there needs to be future work on deuterium. Where's that headed? What do we need? And why are there not more papers being published? Or are there? Are you having trouble getting this research out there?
I am having trouble, but I'm making progress, and I've really coordinated. I've gotten hooked in with a deuterium team. In fact, there's going to be a conference. I'm very excited next month. I'm speaking at a conference that's in Budapest, Hungary, and it's 30 people in a very small conference in which all these people, the whole topic of the conference is deuterium. And I'm super excited about that. So there's a lot more work on deuterium in Russia and Hungary and Ukraine, interestingly. Those are the three countries where the whole deuterium concept was born, especially Russia. And so America has been very slow to catch up, and they don't teach deuterium at all in the medical system. They don't teach it at all.
Yeah.
We're way behind. And I'm working very hard to get the message out through talking to people like you that we need to have more researchers looking into deuterium, because I think it's central. It's absolutely central to metabolism, central to all the problems we're having. And glyphosate is a train wreck for the entire system that manages the deuterium.
Right. Oh my gosh. So your two passions are kind of, I mean, I know you have probably many more passions, but your two...
Those are really at the top of my list.
Those are probably...
And it was autism. Autism was where I started.
Yeah. But thank you, Dr. Seneff. This has been incredible. And people, if they want to learn more about your work, obviously you're publishing lots of papers, you're doing lots of interviews, Toxic Legacy, your book, they can go there. But is there any other place you want to direct people to your work? Toxic Legacy, yes.
Yeah. StephanieSeneff.net is my webpage. I have some materials there. And of course, if my name is pretty rare, so if you can remember Seneff, you can find all kinds of YouTube interviews and presentations, all kinds of stuff. I've been busy for a long time doing things like this to try to get the message out. So yeah, remember my last name, type it into a Google search, and you'll find some things to watch. You'll also find some controversy around me, I should say.
Of course. I mean, the thing that you are taking some big swings at some really powerful industries. So you would imagine that there's some controversy. So, but I also, what I notice whenever I release an interview with you, you have such a vocal band of supporters. People are so grateful for your bravery and for your brilliant mind that makes these connections. And yes, some of them are like in hypothesis stage and we're still fleshing them out, but I still think your work is incredibly important. I'm really grateful for it. And you have so many supporters. I see that every time. So just always remember that. And if you have any last words of wisdom, now's your time. Otherwise, thank you so much.
I always like to say sunlight. Get out in the sunlight. It's good for you.
Thank you, Dr. Seneff. I can't wait till the next one. I know there will be a next one.
I think so. I love talking to you. You're great. Thanks.